Botswana has achieved world renown for its enlightened policies to preserve the natural African environment, keeping it wild, untamed, and untouched by insensitive human development. Vast expanses of indigenous bush, covering millions of square kilometers, are today in the same pristine condition as they've been for many thousands of years. But the wilderness that attracts vast wealth to Botswana through a thriving tourist industry is also a daunting no man's land for foreigners and its own citizens. Every year, the African bush claims the lives of many people who think they can pit their strength against the forces of nature and survive. It is this aspect of Africa that makes our story all the more remarkable. It is a story of courage, faith, and hope against all odds. Some would say it's a story of miracles. It starts so simply with a South African pilot, Costa Markandonatos, who was commissioned to fly a group of businessmen from Gaborone to Maun, a large town in the northwest of Botswana. He would fly his aircraft from South Africa with a South African business associate, Carl Du Plessis. This then is their story.
So the day that I'd met Carl for the first time was the day that he walked through the gates at Lanseria Airport to the new aircraft that I'd bought.
And we flew to Gaborone to collect my colleagues.
The other people I met for the first time in Gaborone, because we picked them up from there.
On Wednesday afternoon, the 1st of March 2000, towards the end of summer, Costa and his 4 passengers took off on a routine chartered flight from Gaborone to Maun. Carl Du Plessis sat next to Costa in front, and inside the plane behind them sat Carl's business associates, Mike Nikolic and Neb Grerak, as well as Mike's beautiful young wife Lynette, whom Mike had married a few months before. They expected a flight that would take them to Maun within a few hours, not a journey that would become a test of faith beyond the limits of human endurance.
Actually, I was quite tired. I was sleeping. They woke me up and they said they have some problems with the engine, one of the engines. But that policy was that we should fly with the twin engine. So I said to them, no, it's fine. I mean, the second engine will carry us to the Maun. That's why we wanted the twin engine. That's why we never fly with the single engine planes.
During the flight, there was a loss of oil pressure on the left-hand engine, as we refer to it as the port engine. A result of loss of oil pressure means that there is insufficient oil to run the engine on. So I elected to shut the engine down. That is when I knew there was an abnormality. Where it became a serious problem was when the rate of descent that the aircraft was maintaining was not according to specification.
And then the plane started losing height. Now, initially I didn't think anything of it. I thought he was just losing height to look for a place to land. Then after a while, it became clear that he couldn't find a place to land, and what was even worse, he eventually informed us that he was unable to maintain height. So.
Then when we came closer to the earth, and we start praying for God to give us the safe passage where we can land. And basically that's it. And then eventually we realized there is no way that we can land anyway. Then pilot declared that we have to crash land.
When I lowered the landing gear to slow the aircraft down enough to safely fly it into the trees, what I considered safely fly it into the trees, it was a choice that we could no longer fly any further. I knew when I'd lowered that landing gear, the drag on the aircraft would be too much to sustain flight. So that was a big responsibility that I had to take to end our flight.
We ran out of being able to stay in the air. I think it was a really bad spot. I mean, there was just trees, and as we came down to the trees, I could see elephants running on the side of the plane. And then I remembered the pilot putting out the wheels because I could feel it.
But I'd known if I'd put the wheels down 1 minute later, we may have hit the trees with them up.
And then I just thought I was going to die. And because it happened so fast, that wasn't distressing. What was just very distressing is I thought of my children and who was going to look after them. And that was really the last thing I was thinking about when we actually crashed into the forest.
We hit a tree with the left-hand wing and the aircraft swung around. From that second, I couldn't remember anything further.
Eventually the plane came to a standstill, and then it was burning around us.
Silence, big silence, you know, just big impact, and that's it, you know. So then approximately, I don't think we know how long it was like that, probably 30 seconds, 1 minute.
And that was scary. First was scary, the fact that this is it. And the second being inside the plane and it's burning. And
the first thing I remember, I tried to loosen myself from the seatbelt. And what I was trying to do, I was trying to use my right hand to unclick it this way. But it was obviously the wrong direction. I should have used it this way. So I felt some sensation, and then the next thing I was aware of Mike helping me unbuckle and then pushing me out of the aircraft.
And I had in my mind that we will come out of there, but only under the one condition that we move out very quickly out. I didn't want to get caught up inside in the fire or something like that.
I tried to kick out the window, and I couldn't get out. And there was this terrible fear that you're going to be inside this plane and you're going to burn alive.
What I could first remember seeing was a faint orange glow through the windscreen. Cole was sitting on my right-hand side, and he'd also exclaimed that that there was a fire outside, that the aircraft was burning.
I then saw my colleagues, Mike and his wife, running past the side, running away from the plane. I looked backwards and I saw that the whole roof was torn off.
Cole managed to find a hole right on top of the cabin, because where I was looking around at the emergency exits, the aircraft was crumbled too much to reach them.
By this time, the whole plane was sort of... it was hard to get past between the two seats. In the process, I pulled my shoe off, and I actually went back while the plane was burning to fetch the shoe.
You have fuel running over a live set of spark plugs. You have an entire tank which is still intact, which itself should be like a bomb.
We were all outside, and then we realized that Neb was still inside the plane, and we went back to drag him out. We all went back, Mike and Costas. When he opened the handle, it broke off, and then he had to pull this door open with his hands, and his hands got burnt.
So Carl and myself removed him in his seat from the wreckage.
All your body, everything goes through one hell of a shock, and then you just sit there and you wait. You know, you need to proper breathe. You need to breathe. You need to kind of relax your mind. You need to just stay there as it is until things get better.
I then looked around and I took a part of the fuselage and pulled it to the side so we could start a fire.
Lynette sustained serious burns when her nylon clothes melted against her skin in the intense heat, but she felt no pain. Neb was still concussed, mercifully, as he would only start feeling pain later. The group had no way of realizing that a broken rib had pierced his lung. They were simply too overawed by the fact that all of them had miraculously survived the crash.
I felt very, very lucky at that stage that all of us were out of that aeroplane, that we were all alive, and the one most precious gift that we had, that we couldn't replace, was all with us, our lives.
I felt a tremendous circle of protection around us.
The way that the aircraft was lying, it should have caught fire instantly. The wings were level. The one wing had torn off, leaving us in a pool of fuel. The other wing was still on and sealed, so it was building up pressure. There was no theoretical reason why that aircraft didn't blow up instantly, killing all the occupants.
Johan Karlitz has held hunting concessions over vast areas of Botswana bush for many years. Many months after the crash, in early summer, before the summer rains, he took our crew along with his wife through the dense African bush to the place where the plane had gone down.
They went down in a Rhodesian teak forest, which at the time of the year that the plane went down, of course, is very lush and green, and it's softer. So a lot of the impact of the plane could have been absorbed by the trees without shattering the planes. It was fortunate. If they would have crash landed or crashed into Mopani, for example, much harder. It's unforgiving.
I was the holder of a license which prepared me for that. An airline transport training that allows you the training of knowing when to put more drag on the aircraft, when to leave devices in, when to take them out. And that was all by the grace of God that I was given that training, without which it might have ended totally, totally different. Guard duties were assigned, and the person that did the most at that stage to keep the fire going, to keep the people comfortable, was Carl. Michael was with his wife. He was looking after Lynette, and he was also very good with the foraging for wood. Neb was complaining about a backache, so we were all sitting trying to keep him comfortable. I remember at one stage I would have my knee in his back, or my hand or my elbow, just to make sure that he was comfortable.
Unbeknown to Costa and his companions, the oil leak had not been their only problem. The navigation equipment had also been faulty. They were off course by some 250 miles in a northeasterly direction. They had in fact flown to the other side of Botswana, over the Buffalo Fence, the line that separates charted territory from uninhabited wilderness. They were in no man's land, vast tracts of African bush covering thousands of square kilometers.
We went into lengthy discussions of how the search and rescue procedures would work.
Oh, we're expecting. I thought people would come and fetch us in an hour or two. That's why I have to keep the fire going. Then it got dark and they're not there, so I was sure they'll be there first thing the next morning.
Okay, waking up in the bush the next morning, you get sounds of bird life, you get sounds of wildlife as well. There's a very, very noticeable silence that one finds between the sounds of birds and between the sounds of animals. It's a rustling of wind in the leaves. It's a fresh air which you breathe. It's the quiet calm of an African morning. And it's in the middle of nowhere. It's what one can relate to being out in the bush, trying your best to be quiet, trying your best to hear what the birds are like. In that case, we were trying our best to find something to say to each other. We were expecting aircraft and helicopters to be on our path that morning. Now, even though they don't come straight overhead, a helicopter is audible from quite a distance away. And I don't know whether the passengers were thinking the same at that time, but I wasn't hearing any helicopters.
I think it was between 7 and 8, I don't recall anymore. We took one of the tires and threw it on the fire to make a lot of smoke.
The tire burned for almost 40 minutes. And during that 40 minutes, it reminded me of a sacrifice that one would see. You'd see the smoke going straight up. But unfortunately, the only person to see that, the only being, seemed to have been God at that stage. No helicopters came rushing closer, no flares, no pencil flares were fired. No emergency locator seems to have been transmitting our position. So the feeling then, for the first time, became one of the system had failed us.
At home, the agony of their loved ones had just begun.
It's like time just stops. Like you don't believe, you don't know if it's that possible, like stops. Like doesn't matter if it's 6 o'clock, like I heard about 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 10, just everything doesn't matter anymore. You know, you just first puzzled that that's impossible. Then you think, okay, I'll do now everything what I can. Then you try calling everybody that you know to try to help you, from police to the army to everybody, to the friends. It's absolutely nightmare. I thought that happened only on the movies, but unfortunately it happened to our lives. And it's the worst experience you can have, not knowing.
His plane's gone missing. There's sort of, there's never really an incident where planes go missing and people are actually found alive. So I think I thought the worst when I first heard the news.
A very strange feeling, in fact. It's as if somebody ran cold water down your back. It was very sudden and never repeated itself. It was a sense of uneasiness at that moment when the Botswana authorities had already carried out a flight from Maun to Gaborone on the track. And because of the inclement weather, and it was getting dark, so they returned back. They had searched the track and they couldn't find anything, and they were going to widen the grid. And then I realized, well, it is probably more serious than what meets the eye.
At the wreckage in the bush, the survivors started to suspect that they might have been off course. Their elation at surviving the plane crash disappeared as their survival seemed once again in the balance.
I then walked around, started looking for water because they're very thirsty, and I found some water in the hollow of a tree, which we took the top of a shaving cream can, shared it around. And I'm quite an impatient person, so this idea of... And when nobody came for us, I started worrying that we might be off course. In fact, must have asked the pilot 500 times, are you sure that we were on course? Because the only thing I could think why people hadn't arrived is because we're not where we're supposed to be and they're not looking at the right place. And earlier in the morning, I discussed with Mike that maybe I should walk. And he initially wasn't in favor of it, saying that it would be hard for him to look after Neb and after Lynette by himself. So I said okay. But then a few hours later, I decided now I was going to walk. And the pilot said, sure, I'll come along. Firstly, I was going to look for water, and then secondly, I hope we can find somebody. So it was kind of simple. I asked the pilot where we were, and he said we were about 150 kilometers south of Maun. So I thought we walk north. You can walk about 30 kilometers a day. If it's 150 kilometers, we'll be there in 5 days. So we'll just walk now for 5 days, so we get to where we're going, so we can tell people where we are. We were walking north, so we were trying to walk north, but we couldn't always do it. Sometimes we had to walk east, sometimes west, because we were on these elephant paths. And the paths don't always go nice and north, and they just go all over the place.
We left the camp at about 11:30 on the next day after the accident. Initially we were walking quite fast and we were comfortable, didn't have any pain, didn't have any chafing, and there was really no physical problem with the way that we were able to walk in the bush. What we were following was elephant trails and animal trails. They form a small little footpath in the forest, which is quite easy to follow.
A journey had begun that would take Carl and Costa ever further from civilization, ever deeper into territory into which only a few adventurous big game hunters venture. In all of Botswana, there was nobody who knew the area where they had crashed, except Johan Karlitz. But the hunting season had just ended. Johan had shut down all his camps for the 6 months winter recess. Most of his staff had left. So had Johan. He was many thousands of kilometers away in South Africa.
We must realize that Africa is different than any other parts of the world, especially in the countries north of southern Africa. It's huge areas, and it's not populated. For example, in this area, there's no population here. It's quite unlikely that you would walk into somebody that can take you home. So we've got the expression Africa wins again, and in the case of a lot of people, you know, Africa win, and then now and then, you know, we beat Africa, but Africa wins more than we do.
We tried a few times to go through the bush, but it's very hard because the trees the branches are scratching you all the time, and it's tiring. You have to push things out of your way. And when you're on the path, it's like a highway for pedestrians. It's a nice walk. And the other reason, which you learn quite quickly, of course, we didn't know setting out on our little trip, but you learn very quickly that the elephants go from water place to water place. So eventually, if you stay on the path, you will arrive at water. So it might take 2 hours. It might take 5 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, but you will eventually get to water. Then it seems like the frequency of water had improved. We didn't have to walk that far before we could get water. In fact, at one stage there was quite a lot of water. It was just the first 2 days was really bad. water. And we would get up in the morning and then drink the water from the leaves where it's condensated.
Their ignorance of basic survival skills certainly seemed likely to kill them, even if predators didn't.
The heat can kill you. You can dehydrate if you don't get enough water in, and then your body is going to go into shock, and then you've got major problems. But in a survival situation, especially in these areas, if you've got access to water and you don't have anything to purify the water, like a tablet, or you're not able to cook it, then of course once you get diarrhea, then you're done.
The group at the plane had to stay alive till rescue teams arrived. But as one day passed into the next, this seemed ever more unlikely.
There are several reasons which helped to those burns to deteriorate in terms of hygienic, because it was a sand, viruses there. We didn't have water at all. We didn't have any first aid kit to put anything on those wounds. So obviously after a day or two she started losing, body was kind of going into the point where you can see, that skin is going to be becoming worse.
Because I knew, well, time is running out, maggots had set in. During the day it was the butterflies laying the eggs, in the evening it was the mosquitoes, so my left arm was deteriorating tremendously. I think it was rotten, to put it as bluntly as that.
You could see that she's going slowly, day by day. It's getting weaker and weaker. Wounds are getting worse and worse. Body's kind of dying. You can see that part of your body is going. It's disappearing from you. So from that point, for me, it was quite difficult, to looking somebody, and you can't help absolutely nothing.
Mike himself had a broken nose and rib, but Neb was in great pain. He could not lie down and had to sleep at night, what little sleep he could get, by standing up against a tree, holding onto it to keep himself from falling over.
In the beginning, obviously, everybody tells you it's going to be all right, everything fine, they'll find them and this and that. And you hope. You're just scared, but you hope in few hours they'll be somewhere. Well, after one night goes, and second day goes, and third, and all the people want to tell you that maybe something really terrible happened, like if they're dead. You don't want to believe, but part of you starts just dying as well. So I'm very religious, and I think in my own way very spiritual as well, and that's what kept me also. I was the saint Nicholas, which we have, which is protector of our family and the house. I was putting the candle non-stop day and night, to protect him wherever he is. I didn't want to believe that anybody is dead. That's what kept me actually sane.
You sort of go into a state of, as a friend of mine would describe it, sort of galloping inertia. You sort of, you just can't really function, and you're almost in a state of paralysis. Things seem almost unreal.
My friends try everything to feed me, to put me in a bed, but it was impossible. I couldn't eat because I didn't know if he's having anything to eat. Couldn't sleep because I don't know if he's sleeping.
Lily was orchestrating massive search efforts. The Botswana Defence Force poured huge resources into the search. Lily commandeered a small army of private search parties. But they were all looking towards the west and south, not the northeast. Nobody suspected the plane would be that far off course. That knowledge would only come with hindsight.
They survived the crash. And they did, at that specific time, what they thought it was right. People that were hurt stayed at the plane with somebody that has not been hurt that much. Two persons that were not hurt decided to walk out. I think that was a chancy decision from a personal point of view, because they did not have the faintest idea where they were. They went north, and they could have ended up in 3 weeks' time if they could have survived, maybe at the border of Botswana, which is the Chobe River.
In ignorance, the men continued to walk north. Retracing their steps months later, it was apparent that they were headed towards great tragedy. If they perished in the bush, so would the group at the wreck.
And of course, all the time that I was walking, I was debating this whole issue with myself, whether I shouldn't have stayed. Because I don't know what's happening to these people. Are they doing okay?
They frequently encountered elephant. Fortunately for them, Johan Karlitz explains.
Elephant, and specifically elephant bulls, are the gentlemen of the bush. The females, because of the young, would like to protect the young and might give you a warning charge that might turn around into a serious charge, and then certainly they will harm you. If they're not going to harm you seriously, they're going to kill you at the end of the day. So if you're in the bush, once again at daytime, just avoid elephant females and their calves. Just stay away from them. See that the wind, which is a great factor, doesn't take your scent to them. Bulls are just gentlemen. What they will do is they will just avoid you, look at you, and then try to get away from you. Not running. They're not really spooked. But if you just don't start something, if you just don't provoke them into something, nothing is really going to happen to you.
I slept very badly because I was scared of the animals. But Costa seemed to sleep fine. And I was also very cold in the night. That was the two things. I was scared of the animals. You hear things move around you in the bush. You don't know what it is. And I was very, very cold. I never ate a thing. I wasn't hungry at all. But as long as I had water to drink, that was fine. So food was not really an issue.
I believe during the 4 days that we walked together, the reason I slept so well is because Cole didn't. And I'm thankful for his guard duty.
What was happening is that I was getting concerned that we were going too slow. And we actually suggested on the second last night that we should walk at night because firstly it's not hot. You should be able to walk much faster and go a longer distance.
Even minor decisions meant either life or death. In this case, it would have meant death.
We must remember that lion is not afraid of man, neither is leopard, but they avoid contact with man. And in daytime, you will not get that one of the predators like a lion or leopard that is in this areas will just attack you without be provoked. There have to be a problem with a specific animal being old, hungry, wounded or sick before it would retaliate without you provoking it. At nighttime, of course, it's a total different ball game. These animals hunt late afternoons, early mornings, and then mainly at nighttime. And at nighttime, you become a prey. So in terms of the predators, if you are going to move at nighttime, then you can open yourself up for maybe quite a lot of problems.
Coincidence, sheer luck, or fateful guidance? Whichever way, they could not implement their decision.
Because the moon that we were hoping to use that night, which shone in all its glory the night that we slept the previous night, was obscured by clouds. So we were tripping over all sorts of what we hoped were logs and stuff. It could have just as well been animals as well, because when we'd eventually settled down where we couldn't walk anymore because the holes were too deep, we found that we were between a herd of elephants. They were on each side of us. They surrounded us totally. That was also in a place where the most lion were to be found, and also where one of the Botswana BDF soldiers had been eaten reportedly by a lion just a few months before. And the reason possibly we could have not been eaten was because we were between a herd of elephants. And it just worked out so nicely that that night, when we decided to sleep, there was a laager formed around us by big, huge elephants, which had nothing to do but sleep either. They didn't get up and run away. They weren't disturbed by us. It's as if they accepted us as part of their group for the night, but that we wouldn't be welcome to travel along with them the next morning, because by the time we woke up, they were already long gone. At about 9:30, 10 o'clock, we caught up to some of the elephants. There was a calf and a mother that were together, And they stood in our elephant path. And we weren't going to accept that these elephants were going to slow our pace down, because we had places to be. So I would clap my hands at the elephants and encourage them to walk off. They would flap their ears and run a few meters, and then a few meters further, or a kilometer or so on, they would be back in the path again. At one stage, with the elephants that were quite close to us, we also came across a lion spoor that, to me, it seemed as if it was in the spoor that we had stepped. So the animals that were there, we just made peace with, that we were being sheltered from them by a force, what I'll call a heavenly force, that sheltered us from those animals.
God's hand seemed to be guiding and protecting Costa and Carl. But what of Neb, Mike and Lynette back at the wreckage?
One day you can say, okay, fine, they'll find us. Second day, third day, when comes fourth day, you know, my strength is leaving me. I don't have any more power to walk. I don't have any more power to go and collect the wood. Wood was further and further from the fire now. In your mind is only to be rescued, and if you can find water, nothing else. That feeling that there is no water doesn't leave you all the time. Anything, only in your mind is water, nothing else. You're just missing that, and you're just thinking about water all the time. Because Waterhole was just about kilometers south of us, not far from us. We could hear the birds every day there, but it was dangerous to move. Then I cannot be able to come back to you cannot find the aeroplane then after that.
Praying was all that remained for the group at the wreck as time ran out.
My wife had only one goal: to fight until they come, fighting basically for life. She didn't feel injuries in that moment because, in her mind, obviously, was just for them to come. You're fighting constantly, hour by hour. You're waiting for people to come. You don't think about that. You just wanted to be rescued.
I prayed all the time. My mother passed on about 5 years ago, and I had a few conversations with her along the way. And I prayed to her, and I prayed to God. The most trying time was Sunday. I felt that somehow I had to ask God and my mom to prepare a place for me.
The situation with her was really difficult, and we could see that she's going slowly. Day by day, it's getting weaker and weaker. Wounds are getting worse and worse. Body's kind of dying. You can see that part of your body is going. It's disappearing from you.
And I remember I woke up one evening and I just started babbling. And I said to my mom, please prepare a place for me. And then Mike would wake up and he'll just draw me back down.
If you ask yourself how much you love somebody, or if you ask yourself what is the reason of life or love or whatever, until you come to the close point to looking at that into your eyes, and then if you lose somebody, then you realize you can see you losing somebody, realize how much you love or what that person means to you and things like that,
So far as Mike could see, Neb had already lost touch with reality.
From the other side, I had a colleague which had obviously concussion or impact from the accident, that he was living in his own world, completely out of what's happening there. He had no clue what is going on.
Carl and Costa were still heading north, wandering deeper and deeper into no man's land. The stagnant water they'd been drinking started to have an effect on them. Their determination had not weakened, but their bodies were slowly succumbing to dehydration and exhaustion. Late Saturday afternoon, they noticed a kind of crossing, an elephant path cutting through the one they were on.
In fact, we'd walked past that crossroad, about a kilometer to the west of that crossroad. And we'd slept to the side of the road, about 2 meters to the left-hand side of the road in the direction we were walking, under a few bushes that we'd found. And I was lying right next to Cole, sleeping. But when I woke up, I found Cole hanging onto this branch, saying, he's got to hold it. There's an elephant here. He's busy pushing our lager over.
We were sort of in the way of the elephants coming to drink water. And then the elephant actually came up to where we were lying and sort of shaking the tree under which I was lying.
So the elephant at that stage, his trunk couldn't have been more than about 2 or 3 meters from Carl's hand where he was sitting.
I suppose they were also quite perturbed at having this kind of intrusion into their world and not being able to recognize it. But I was absolutely petrified.
The next morning we decided to backtrack because the road was starting to become drier in the direction we went. And we turned around and walked back to the crossroads and then took what we thought was the wrong path or the non-logical path and followed that.
It certainly seemed to make no sense to suddenly turn east at the crossroads after days of walking north, but they did.
We were struggling to get past the elephants initially because they were also on the path leading to the water. And we'd found many paths where we couldn't walk because the marshes were starting to get too thick.
It was then that they heard it, a low, rhythmic thumping sound, coming from somewhere off the pathway, but ahead of them.
And as we were walking, he was walking behind me, I saw this straight line, perfectly straight line. And I know that in nature you don't get straight lines, perfectly straight lines. But also I didn't want to get excited about it because throughout the whole journey, sometimes you imagine that you hear things or that you see things. And you get your hopes up and you realize it's just your imagination that is running away with you. And so we just walked towards this line and I didn't say anything and Costas was coming behind me and I said to him, did you see that? And he also didn't say much if I recall correctly. And as we were walking towards this thing, I saw it was a roof of a structure and then, God, I couldn't believe it, we found somewhere. Then I knew it's going to be fine.
So once again, the timing was absolutely perfect. It was Sunday morning, it was at a time when prayers were going up, it was at a time that everybody knew that we were being looked for. Families were possibly hoping, and the pump was turned on with a low enough sound that it attracted us, in the middle of nowhere.
An irrational decision to change course, the end of the hunting season, an almost deserted hunting camp, but for an apparently fortuitous decision of the camp manager to stay on a day or two longer, her decision to switch on the pump for an hour or two. And two strange men walked in.
Costas and I was quite a spectacle because I'd taken off my trousers and I'd thrown it over my shoulder because it was not so hot. So I was walking with clothes that I had black shoes and short black socks and sort of boxer underpants, a white shirt that was covered in blood and stuff. Costas had even thrown his underpants away and he had more or less the same kind of uniform on. So he looked quite a spectacle and we must really have looked something to see. And he said, no, I must go and look for somebody because he just wants to get dressed. And I started walking around in the camp and I thought what I'd do, if there's nobody there, I'll just switch off this water pump. And then somebody will come and look to see why their water pump stopped. And as I was walking, I saw this lady sitting in a tent reading a book. And I said, hello. And she was quite startled, I think.
Coincidence followed coincidence. In all of Botswana, there was only one man who could rapidly lead a team to the site of the crash, and he was Johan Karlitz. He knew the area intimately. He had held a hunting concession there since 1987.
Managed to plot the position of the aircraft with reference only to certain trees, certain hills that I've seen, and certain type of vegetation. There was a cut line that we'd crossed, which Johan seems to have knowledge of. And if it wasn't for Johan Karlitz, the BDF might never have found that wreck in time.
And then on the Sunday, I'll never forget, it was about 6 o'clock at night and the light was fading. And the pilot said we were about to go back because we wouldn't be able to see much more. And he had his headset on and I was in the cockpit standing behind him. And then he turned, obviously someone was communicating with him. And he looked around and he said, I think we found them. And I cannot tell you. That is
That is indescribable. That is just, when I saw Costa appear, he was so sore. He had very big sores on his legs. He couldn't walk at all at that stage. You know, he walked wide-legged because it was a roar from his knees upwards, both sides. And he looked bad, of course, after all those days not shaved, and very, very sore. His arms were very sore, but I had him back alive. And I thanked my Lord before I went and hugged him.
I was emotional too. I saw my mother and my father. My brother was there, my cousin. They were friends. People which at one stage one could ask yourself, what if you never saw these people again? How would it feel? Answers to those questions only come very much later in your life, and one never realizes the importance of a mother or the importance of a family that's holding a little candle out for you. And I'm pretty sure that I would like to be the sort of person to my child one day that my mother and father were to me that day.
And Carl was sort of very subdued. And, you know, people asked him, what would you like to drink? Would you like a beer? And all he's been dreaming of all these days is a Coke. So that's all he wanted to drink. And then we sat out on the pavement outside where, you know, people were smoking and chatting and so on. But he was just totally, he almost seemed numbed by it all.
But now, of course, we were there. Now all the time I'm worrying about the people back at the plane. Firstly, I don't know if they've been rescued in the interim. How are they doing? I was worried because there was no water close by the plane.
Fifth day, where actually I heard that maybe they didn't come out of the bush when two first people came out. They left 3 of them wounded in the middle of the nowhere. No food, no water with wild animals. That's where I really almost got heart attack. That was about 11 o'clock at night. I didn't know what to think. I just knew that I have to go immediately to Maun. And for all these days, I was wearing Neb's t-shirts, and you see how much bigger he is than me. But that was something that kept me close to him, you know. So I thought if I'm wearing his clothes, you know, he must be alive. So in such a big, huge t-shirt and everything, I just grabbed my handbag, and I was first thing in the morning in Maun on the airport waiting because I didn't want to believe anything until I see him.
Lynette was still alive when the rescue team arrived, and so was Neb Greerak.
Basically, while we were there in bush with all these things and without the water, you as a normal person, you change. You look for the survival, and by any means you are trying to survive. You actually grow the energy and you grow the will in yourself to survive.
One of the med rescue paramedics came up to me and he says to me, "How are you feeling?" So I said, "You know what? I actually feel 150%. And little did I know at that time that I might have just lived a couple more hours had they not rescued us. They said, had they come 2 hours later, I wouldn't have survived.
Very emotional moment when you see somebody after 5 days. You know, it's kind of, you never forget that face or that moment. Yeah.
Oh, I was happy. I was so elated.
Are you born again? Sorry.
And when I saw my husband, of course, first I was watching where is he. We couldn't even say anything to each other, nothing. We both just cried. I was at a peace then. Yes, he's alive, nothing matters anymore.
It's definitely, I think that it was orchestrated by God. And that's the only reason why we are alive. There is no other reason, because according to statistics or to anything else, our chance of survival was 1 to million. So not big chance of survival. See, always I'm the religious person and I believe in God. Wherever I go and carry either in my pocket uh, or with me small icons. I still have them, even in my pocket right now. So I definitely believe that that was the will of God that we survived.
This is the one from the bush. That's why it's scratched like that. It was from the, it has fallen near to the plane. From his pocket, he lost his bracelet, his wedding ring. It's in the bush. But what he found, his little icon. So it was near, it didn't burn. It's a wooden one, but didn't burn. Everything else burned. The plane burned. You will see the pictures, but not the icon.
Whole accident was controlled by some higher power than just us. And how it happened and how it finished, I think it was involvement of something what doesn't happen every day, or something what is ruled by normal circumstances. I think it was done on the much higher level.
If you want to use the word miraculous, is that we walked into this lodge. Because the chances of I mean, we were totally lost really in a way to find it. We could very easily have walked a kilometer or 2 kilometers past it, and we would have kept on walking till we get to Zambia, to the border. Because I was told there are no other lodges north of that particular lodge.
There's no other way that they could have made it. The one engine cut out. They had problems with the engine. They flew for whatever time it was with one engine. Then they landed in a very, very thick forest and missed a huge tree by the size of an hair. The plane burns out. Everybody walks out of that plane without major breaks or major injuries or major problems. 2 people start walking, 3 people stay behind. They walked a Sunday while there was a prayer meeting in my home into a camp, get on the radio, and the next day we find people. They didn't get lost. Everything was just a journey of God. There was no ways that it could have happened without His grace. And it's not, you don't even have to be convinced. It's just a fact of life that there was a higher being, there was a hand and an eye watching over them all the time.
I think God has got a plan for me. You know, He's taken me to an area in my life that I've never experienced. He's awakened something within me, and I think that was the only way that He could do that. I think maybe somewhere along the line I forgot how to live, and that is probably where the puzzle had to fit. It's the small things that matter now. It's not the big things. It's the getting up in the morning, being able to walk, being able to be with your husband, the family, being able to share the smallest things with your family, and enjoying the spirit of life.
When you lose somebody, you know that all these things which, even today, I work hard and everything, they don't matter. That material things doesn't really matter. They come and go. We die, and these things, they stay behind us. I knew that was one experience, that everything I rather lose, but not one member of my family. That's one thing. Another thing, you learn really how much you love one person. And so we learn a lot through that. Priorities in the life. What is up to that time we kill each other, you know, working. He's working, I'm working. Accounts, this, what we're going to buy, we change a lot from that accident. We entertain more friends. We entertain a lot weekly. Our friends, we enjoy food and wine with our friends, music. We live much better now than we used to live before. We appreciate life better. Both. He will tell you the same.
For Lynette, the crash had been but the beginning of a journey that required as much faith of her as her determination to survive her ordeal in the bush.
Smile.
The road in which I travel has obviously meant to be this way. So I cannot, but I do believe it's a miracle. After such tremendous trauma, still to have the privilege of having a child, that is definitely a miracle for me.
Costa's bachelor lifestyle has been replaced by a return to family values. He and his young wife Talita are much happier for it.
And Costa has really changed, deeply changed. He's down to earth again. He's back where he belongs.
So I believe that a story this big doesn't yield heroes. I've never been a hero to anyone. But what it does do is it opens a lot of eyes. And if I have the opportunity to be a mouthpiece, to relate my experience and my divine intervention, then I've achieved what I believe could be God's plan.